Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're stripping away the mythology of the world's most famous album to reveal the bizarre truths, rigid constraints, and erased figures that actually shaped Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. I mean, everybody knows the iconic cover, right? But almost nobody knows what actually happened to make it.
Alright, let's dive right in by remembering one massive constraint. They only had 4 tracks to work with. 4! And before they even stepped foot in the studio, the band and their engineer agreed to absolutely 0 new studio tricks. Basically, every single trick that made their previous album, Revolver, so groundbreaking was entirely off the table. And honestly, that sets up the ultimate irony of this whole masterpiece. When the album went on to win 4 Grammys, including literally the first ever album of the year for a rock record, 0 Beatles showed up to accept them. Why? Well, because they were on the exact opposite side of the planet in India.
So, think you know this record? We're going to dismantle the established lore by looking at how they invented sound, the chaos in the studio, band lyrics, who got erased from the record, and finally, the absent victors.
Section 1. Inventing sound from scratch. Just imagine being handed the biggest band in the world, having your entire technical playbook banned by your own agreement, and just having to figure it out.
Because all their usual tricks were banned, their 21-year-old engineer, Geoff Emerick, had to get pretty creative. He leaned heavily on this piece of gear that nobody else was really using. You see, the main mixing desk barely had any high-frequency control, but this little in-house Abbey Road invention did. So he used it to push the sound way past the studio's incredibly strict house rules.
To get that specific sound, Emerick literally pulled the bottom head off Ringo's bass drum and stuck a microphone directly inside it. EMI's own technical department was so furious they actually filed a formal complaint against him for doing this, claiming the air pressure was wrecking their incredibly expensive microphone capsules. He actually had to get special permission just to keep capturing that iconic drum sound.
Moving on to Section 2, Chaos in the Studio. Now that the technical baseline was fought for and established, let's look at the sheer absurdity happening on the recording floor on February 10th, 1967.
Picture this. You've got 40 classically trained orchestra musicians walking into the studio in full evening dress. And for the 24-bar crescendo and a day in the life, Paul McCartney and producer George Martin start handing out these totally ridiculous party favors. The lead violinist gets a gorilla paw, a bassoon player gets a balloon tied to his instrument, all while Mick Jagger and Keith Richards are just sitting in the room watching it happen.
And the kicker here? That eye-watering sum of 367 pounds paid for those highly confused musicians. To get that massive, chaotic crescendo, they looped the tape of those 40 musicians 5 separate times to simulate a 200-piece orchestra. Oh, and my favorite part, the Beatles made the orchestra wear formal attire but showed up in their own regular clothes. And just to add a little more insanity to these sessions, a guy claiming to be Jesus Christ actually showed up at Paul's front gate on February 9th. Paul gave him a cup of tea and then actually brought him along to quietly sit in the corner during the Fixing a Hole session at Regent Sound. The guy left afterward, and nobody ever heard from him again. Seriously, you cannot script this stuff. Section 3. Band lyrics and stolen posters. Let's shift away from the studio antics to where the band's inspiration actually came from, and how they covered their tracks when things got hot. Just a week before the album even dropped, the BBC banned A Day in the Life over just 6 words, "I'd love to turn you on." John and Paul publicly denied it was about drugs. Paul claimed it was about a dream, while John blamed a car crash headline. Only for Paul to admit decades later, completely on the record, that it was absolutely a knowing nod to Timothy Leary's drug culture mantra. They lied to the press in real time and admitted it later. And you can really see how this plays into their creative process. Take Being for the Benefit of Mr. Kite. John Lennon didn't really invent much of that at all. He bought an antique 1843 circus poster in Kent and literally lifted nearly the entire lyric word for word right off the print. And a super fascinating detail that usually gets left out, that poster was for Pablo Fanck, Britain's first black circus proprietor. Section 4. Erased from the record. You know, not every story surrounding this album is funny or quirky. Some incredible details, and people were deliberately cut out of the narrative. George Martin, their legendary producer, literally used these exact words in his memoir. Why? Because Paul McCartney wanted the strings for She's Leaving Home arranged immediately. Martin was busy recording Cilla Black that afternoon, but Paul couldn't wait, so he just went and hired arranger Mike Leander instead. It remains the only Beatles song in Martin's entire career with the band that he didn't arrange simply because he wasn't given the chance.
Then you have George Harrison's Within You, Without You. The other Beatles didn't even play on it. Ringo reportedly just played chess in the corner of the studio. This incredibly complex music was performed by musicians from the Asian music circle playing the dilruba, tambura, and tabla. But they went completely uncredited for half a century until a researcher finally identified them in 2017. 50 whole years without their names attached to a masterpiece.
And if you look closely at who actually got cut from that famous album cover, things get pretty interesting. Jesus was cut due to Lennon's recent controversies. Gandhi was a verified corporate risk. The EMI chairman had him pulled to protect record sales in India. But that rumor about a Hitler cutout being physically hidden on set behind the band, that remains completely unverified by any unobscured photograph, and it is heavily, heavily disputed.
Even the origins of the songs themselves are totally tangled up. I mean, Paul says Lovely Rita came from a newspaper story about a meter maid, then later said it was just a made-up word he liked. Meanwhile, real-life traffic warden Meta Davies insists she ticketed his car and he asked for her name. Honestly, neutrally accepting that nobody actually knows the absolute truth is so much more interesting than picking a side.
Which brings us to Section 5, the absent victors. As we wrap up this explainer, let's look at the structure hidden beneath all this noise, the intense competition that fueled it all, and how the band famously walked away.
McCartney openly admitted they were sort of steering Pepper based on the Beach Boys album, Pet Sounds. It created this incredible hyper-competitive loop. The Beatles' Rubber Soul pushed Brian Wilson to make Pet Sounds pushed the Beatles to make Pepper, and Pepper sent Wilson chasing his doomed Smile project. This wasn't solitary genius happening in a vacuum. It was an open rivalry of two bands constantly pushing each other to new heights.
And the attention to detail in that pursuit of greatness was just staggering. Like what sounds like chaotic animal noise at the end of Good Morning, is actually a super strict sequence demanded by Lennon. Every single animal is capable of eating or scaring the one before it, right down to the final clucking hen, beautifully and deliberately melting right into the guitar lick of the next song. It's chaos on the surface, but brilliant design underneath.
And here is the absolute ultimate irony. On February 29, 1968, when Sgt. Pepper won Album of the Year, the very first rock record ever to do so, the band was nowhere near the ceremony. The exact night rock music got its biggest establishment stamp of approval, the Beatles were in Rishikesh, India, studying meditation with the Maharishi.
It's literally a script you couldn't write better if you tried. So, I'll leave you with this. What does it actually mean to build a revolutionary masterpiece through rigid constraints, bizarre lies, and utter studio chaos, only to actively walk away the exact moment the establishment crowns you for it? How much of the magic we associate with this album is actually just the friction of its chaotic creation? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the myths.